Welcome to You Are Not a Frog, the podcast for GPs, doctors and other professionals in high-stress jobs. Working in today's pressured environment, you may feel like a frog in boiling water. Things have heated up so slowly that you might not have noticed the extra long days becoming the norm. You've got used to feeling constantly busy and often one crisis away from not coping. Let's face it, frogs only have two options: to stay in the pan, be boiled alive, or to hop out and leave. But you are not a frog, and that's where this podcast comes in. You can do more than just hop out or burn out. There are simple changes that you can make which will make a huge difference to your stress levels and help you enjoy life again. I'm your host, Dr. Rachel Morris, GP, turned executive coach, speaker, specialist in workplace resilience and creator of the Shapes Toolkit training programme. In the podcast, I'll be chatting with friends, colleagues and experts, all who have an interesting take on this stuff, so that together we can take back control and thrive. If you want more resources, including CPD reflection forms for the podcast, then make sure you've signed up to the You Are Not a Frog Collective, and please share these podcasts with anyone who needs them. On with the episode. So it's really great to have with me on the podcast today, Michael Ledzion. Now, Michael is a self-described chief sportivator, and I really wanted Michael to come on to talk about the power of exercise. Now, Michael's a tech entrepreneur who now runs a social enterprise bringing Olympic athletes into schools. So, Michael, just introduce yourself a little bit further for us.
So as you say, I've now got this social enterprise. It's called Sports for Schools. We arrange for athletes to visit schools and inspire children. They really talk about their experiences. It's about motivating kids to do more than they might otherwise do, the resilience, but also around physical activity and health. I used to run tech businesses in sort of Cambridge and some of them sort of California based, but I just wanted to get on with something more interesting, more sort of meaningful, shall I say? Not interesting. It's a fascinating world, actually, tech world. And so I got into this, and then I started getting interested in physical activity, and reading up about it. I read a book by John Ratey, who wrote a book called Spark, and that really literally sparked off my interest about 5-6 years ago. So yeah, I'm in the process of writing a book aimed at teachers and parents to help them understand just how incredible this stuff is, physical activity.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the reason why I wanted to get you on the podcast, because whenever we meet up, we always end up talking about exercise and the power of exercise and how important it is, and how pretty much most people, there's some people that get a bit obsessed with it and maybe doing a little bit too much, but it's a struggle. And I think when we get really busy and when we get really overworked, particularly as professionals, exercise is often the first thing that goes. When actually, if you look at all the evidence and everything to do with exercise, it should be the first thing that you put in when you get too busy, not the first thing that goes. So has that been your experience in your own life?
Oh, completely. As you know, Rebecca, my wife, and she knows what happens when I don't go out for a bit of exercise every day. That's the acid test, isn't it? But it is, and actually, I started talking about this with my team in the company, and actually, one of them took it right on, and we've ended up. He had an alarm that goes off every 2 minutes. I say we're not had because obviously we're not together in the office at the moment, but every hour it would go beep beep, and we'd all get down and do 20 press-ups, and or something. Not everybody felt strong enough to do press-ups, and so it was something, and that carried on in various different ways. That started 3 or 4 years ago, and it's a fabulous, simple way of just getting exercise into your daily life. The stats are very interesting. So you and I live in Britain, maybe some people listening to this outside of the country, but over 80%, in fact 85% of girls and about 80-ish% of boys, this isn't the 5 to 17-year-old bracket, don't do enough physical activity, and all that's been asked of them is to do an hour of moderate to vigorous activity a day. And it's not because they don't want to do it. I often ask, have you ever met a sort of 7-year-old who'd prefer to walk rather than run? Well, I haven't, and it's a bit sad really, because we beat it out of them somehow, but we just don't provide the space for them to do that, and that sort of then extends into adulthood. And really, it's about my focus actually is understanding. One of the focuses is how to make it fun, how to make it exciting. None of us want to have a chore. Got to go out and go for a run. It's got to be something you look forward to.
Yeah. And so how do you make it fun? How do you make it fun for kids? Because my experience is that on the weekend, they're all watching telly or playing the Xbox or whatever. And I'm saying, right, we're going to go out and do something like, oh, mum, you're always on about going outside and going for a walk. And even my 10-year-old, it's like, I don't want to go for a walk. I don't want to go for a bike ride. And it's quite difficult working out actually what to do.
Well, every family has their tricks. My trick is friends. Get friends involved. We're going for a walk with your best mate and his parents. Oh, I'm suddenly interested. And actually, it's the same for us, isn't it? If we're told, oh, you're going to get together with some mates and let's go and have some fun together, you're much more interested than if your parents are going to take you for a walk. We still really enjoy our parents, all of us do, but you know what I'm saying. And so different people also have different interests, and so you've got to listen to them. There's actually some great, come back to the study, the points about your kids watching, playing games and watching television, and well, it's not watching television anymore, is it? It's just looking at their iPads.
YouTube mainly.
YouTube, yeah exactly. There's some interesting studies actually in schools where, and elsewhere, where when children are given a choice of being outdoors and playing and creating their own games, actually, over time they migrate to doing just that and not spending time on the phone. The phone is an alternative because there's nothing else to do. There's a great case study in New Zealand of a school that really went, well, some people might say radical. I just think it's going back to normal. They basically said you can do anything you want in the playground, so long as, two rules or guides, you don't intentionally hurt somebody else or their property. Actually, if you think about it, that's all that's necessary, isn't it? Go out and have some fun. As long as you don't intentionally hurt anybody or intentionally, do something to their property, then actually, basically, you can get on with your life. And children are much better judges of what they're capable of doing than we are. They know what their limits are because they've just learned a new skill yesterday. Well, this case study in New Zealand ended up, they didn't tell the parents this. They just, as a teacher body, they just said, well, we're just going to apply these rules without telling anybody about them. 6 months later, the kids were climbing trees. They were skateboards out there. They had invented their own games. Their discoveries were as much that children are much, much better at inventing games than parents are. And it was a happier, more productive, and they think academically better school. But it's a bit early to say.
I think that's really fascinating, both in the region of playing together and just being creative, but also the productivity. So why is it that we are more productive if we are more active?
So this is big chapters in the book I'm writing. So when you do physical activity, one of the things that happens is you produce a thing called BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. I'm going to get a bit technical briefly, but it's like having fertilizer for the brain. Growth factors grow cells. This is brain-derived neurotrophic factor, growth factor. It was recently, I say recently in scientific terms, 20 or 30 years ago, they realized that this stuff grows brain cells. And actually, if you put a drop of this into a Petri dish, so the scientist's plastic, glass dish, and dropped it onto some brain cells, you can see the neurons sprout more dendrites. They grow basically, and so this stuff is like the fertilizer for the brain. And physical activity is one of a great way and one of the best ways of making this stuff. So there's a huge linkage between brain cognitive performance and physical activity. How much? Well, that's a big question. What type? Also a question. There's some definite ideas on that. But a good study in children that was done actually quite a while back, about 20 years ago, looked at over 100,000 children in California and just compared their academic performance to their fitness levels. Now, if you're in the bottom 1/6 of fitness levels, you might score, well, I should put it differently. You would be in the bottom third academically on maths and English, or numeracy and literacy. If you were in the top 6th, then you would score in the top third. So you might think, well, it's not too bad, but it is actually from it's twice as better in terms of the graph. It doesn't mean twice the grade, but it does mean in Britain with our GCSEs and A-levels and the normal curve, that you are talking about a difference between a sort of D-ish type grade, CD grade, and an AB type grade, the two ends of that spectrum. And BDNF and the way the brain works is a big part of that. There's behavioral things that happen. You have a much better balanced brain. So dopamine is a big thing we talk about. And dopamine is happiness, it's stimulation, gets produced in a nice balanced quantity. But BDNF really, what better invitation can you have than go do some exercise, get aerobically fit, and produce more BDNF, and frankly do a lot better.
Yeah. Is there any other way of growing BDNF, of getting BDNF? Presumably sitting on the sofa watching Netflix eating donuts doesn't produce BDNF.
It doesn't really.
That's a shame.
Actually, there's a lovely study which I love to quote from University of Münster, and they actually got people jogging on a treadmill. So I've got in my slide deck a picture of a German in his lederhosen and another bunch, the couch potatoes. And what they found after 20 minutes of physical activity, that people's brain speed, so they measured this in various different ways, and I won't bother you with the detail, was 20% faster. So now if you think about 20% faster brain, I'm interested in schools. Well, a school day is roughly 5 hours sitting in class, let's say, not always in class and so on, but 20% faster is basically knocks an hour off school.
Yeah.
And it's cumulative, that's the other thing. So, as you learn more, think about the brain as a network of connections. And we all know that, networks have a network effect. And the same sort of thing happens. It's not properly been quantified and understood yet, but the same sort of thing happens over time. So get fit, stay fit, and you actually increase those improvements.
Yeah, and I guess in brains, networks are really important for creativity, aren't they? For making different connections between different bits of your brain, and being able to use all of your brain, not just the bit that's focusing on stuff as well. So, is there any evidence about creativity in exercise, for example?
So, I haven't actually found any specific one on creativity in exercise, but your point about the brain networking is come back to physical activity. Actually, when you do a creative, when you're thinking about stuff, you're actually leveraging some of those circuits that you created that were designed for physical movement. So actually being physically able helps you to be more cognitive, because you actually use those same circuits. It's not as if one bit is for moving and another bit is for thinking. Actually, you're using both. And creativity is a key part of memory. So one of the ways we remember is by connecting to an existing memory, adding a bit of imagination onto that, and that sort of is the leap that creates the memory, if that makes sense. And actually there's another point here, since we're talking about memory. So memories are often teachers will drum stuff into you, or we try and rote learn stuff, do something and get better and better at it. Well, memory strength is a function of repetition, but it's also a function of intensity. So I don't know where you're working at home today, I think, but if you'd gone out this morning and a lion had jumped out in your front door, did that happen this morning?
No, but occasionally it does.
It does, right. So one of your children jumping out at you. But if a real lion had jumped out at you, I can fairly much guarantee you'd remember that for the rest of your life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that's an intense experience. And so playing with that and that need to have a bit of imagination to create memories and repetition actually is the way you create memories. And I'm sort of going on here, but one of the things that really nailed it for me how important this is that when you do learn stuff, what's happening in your brain is not some sort of black box thing. It's actually physical connections. So a memory is a connection between neurons. I mean, simplistic, you could say, well, one neuron connects to another. Actually, it's not, it's loads. And then when you strengthen that memory, that connection gets physically stronger. There's a thing called myelin sheath, which is kind of around the neuron, the axon, and that gets thicker and stronger. So if you've got plumbing, imagine you've got, instead of a fine little tube, you've got something big, thick, and steel, and it gets bigger. that lasts longer, and it means you use it more often. And that is a memory. It's a strong connection between neurons.
And so exercise helps with that because the BDNF, that's a big factor in that sort of thing happening. Is that right? So
because it's oiling it, and actually the BDNF helps connect neurons together. You then have these things called neurotransmitters, which come at the synapse, which is where neurons connect together. And BDNF not only helps that process, but it actually also stimulates the production of new brain cells. And so you have a brain cell floating around waiting to connect, as it were. And then something happens and it's connected. So you've got more of this ability to develop and to learn.
So that's interesting. Does it have to be really vigorous exercise, or could it just be moving? A friend of mine has just bought a treadmill so that when her son's watching telly, she can just walk, not massively fast, but actually she's doing something. Is that good enough?
Yes, exactly. So what is the perfect routine is what we're after, isn't it? What can I just do and just have the perfect Einstein brain? So the answer is that it appears from the research, and I say appears because actually this is an area of quite cutting edge research, that aerobic fitness is probably the most valuable. An intense piece of exercise can have a short effect, but it's incredibly short. And actually what you want to do is have periods of aerobic exercise that build up your aerobic fitness, and that actually has the biggest effect on BDNF production. And they've tested this in mice, for example. Mice, they're great for testing. We're still allowed to do it on mice, though I do feel for the poor mice, where they put them in treadmills and measured their BDNF production and their ability to solve sort of maze problems and stuff like that. So aerobic fitness is clearly valuable. Of course, when you talk about young people, and all of us actually, you need some strength and conditioning as well. And that is valuable. You need it for physical health, but actually for brain function, it's absolutely clear that aerobic is valuable. So what does that mean? Moderate to vigorous. So moderate is you and I going for a jog and we're having a chat. We're just about to keep a chat going. Not too much.
No, Michael, I'm not sure I could chat if I was jogging. Cycling, let's use cycling.
Let's use cycling then. Yeah, so you're just about able to keep a conversation going.
Yes.
And of course, but it's actually a great metric, because if you're aerobically fit, then if you're unfit, then actually that's still the level which is moderate exercise for you.
Yeah.
Gradually you'll pick it up. Vigorous is just can't quite keep a conversation going. You're just puffing too much. Your heart rate's up too much, and so on. So they also want moderate to vigorous exercise. Interestingly, though, if you're talking about things that help you in developing better cognitive function, there's another wonderful study of where they looked at people running in town and running in the country through a forest. In fact, it was 35 minutes in both cases. What they found is that brain processing speed was 20% faster for those that ran through a forest. So that's interesting, isn't it? And then if you start thinking about it, it's like, the brain in some ways is, think of it as a muscle maybe, but don't think it's not a muscle clearly, but as an analogy, well, if you use your muscles, they work better. Well, if you use your brain, it works better. If you're in a forest, there's a lot more stimulation. And your brain, without you realizing it, your sort of limbic brain, your more base brain, is looking around at all those leaves. They're moving, they're watching for animals. I mean, it's a really stimulating environment. Whereas if you're running through town, well, it's a straight wall around the corner, flat pavement. Whereas in forest, you've got to carefully drop your foot, and so the brain is getting a really happy, stimulating workout.
Oh, and I guess there's that thing about being in greenery and in nature as well, which is really good for our mental health too. So you can hit all those birds with one stone. I read recently that if you take your age away from 180, that's your sort of moderately aerobic heart rate. Is that right? So that would be, so I'm 45, so it'd be 135, which sounds about right actually to me.
Is it 180 or 220?
Oh, it might be 220. Oh my word! If it's 220, I'm in trouble.
But remember, that's your peak. That's also the max.
No, this is for the aerobic heart rate.
Right. So it probably is 180 for aerobic. That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
The max level.
So I know some people wear those heart rate monitors to keep them in that thing. So I think whatever you do, that's just a nice thing. Whether you're out of breath so you can't talk, or whether you could actually carry on a good conversation, and that's important to know. So why are we so bad at getting enough? If it's so valuable, why don't we value it so much? I mean, we were laughing the other day. I was giving you the example of because of COVID, it's obviously more difficult to exercise because we can't necessarily do everything that we could do before. But I took my daughter to school on her bike, and we were told off for coming to school on the bike because there wasn't enough room to socially distance for lots and lots of kids around the bike rack. And I was really shocked because I thought, crumbs, the one thing that we're doing is getting out, getting some exercise twice a day to and from school. So why is it that our teachers aren't really on top of this? And why is it that I think even as GPs, we're not really on top of it for ourselves? We might tell our patients to do it, but we don't necessarily follow it ourselves. Why do we not really get the importance of this?
Well, you could have lots of conspiracy theories. You could have all sorts of thoughts on that subject. I think in the school system that I work in, we have made a mess of it by having targets and exams. And so there is a lot of evidence that if you have an exam, then people will teach to the exam.
Yeah.
And actually, I don't think we want that. The history of education, interesting, in this country started out with the desire for people to read the Bible. So we started teaching them English about 200 years ago, 250 years ago, beginning of the Industrial Revolution. A bit more control needed over our population, so let's teach them how to read the Bible. And then there was the Industrial Revolution, and then they wanted a bit more than that, so they added maths into the mixture, and then they wanted more and more. So but it was all driven by massive getting lots of people into a classroom to teach them enough so they could just do the manufacturing job. And unfortunately, we're kind of stuck with that DNA of how our education systems come about. Ken Robinson sadly died recently, but he really talked about creativity and how movement stimulates creativity, and it does. It is actually, you asked me earlier, and I'm going to come back to that subject. If you measure BDNF production, it's much more stimulated by irregular music than by regular music. Yeah. So anything which is complicated, which is a bit more challenging, stimulates more production of BDNF and gets your brain working. But I think what's happened generally in the school system, we come on to us adults later, what's happened in the school system is that the focus on exams has driven some of this, but also actually there's a lack of education about this. Of course, every teacher wants to have a classroom full of bright, engaged kids. But it's just not part of what is taught. And so when I go and give talks in schools, there's a lot of incredulity and excitement because suddenly they're thinking, well, gosh, there's some tricks here we can really make use of. In their case, of course, they have to teach the exam again, so it's about getting more better exam results. But nonetheless, it's a step in the right direction.
But then getting the kids more active, it's going to get them better exam results, isn't it? So it's win-win.
Absolutely, and actually behaviour in class is better. The events we run with our Olympic athletes involve fitness circuits. I remember one teacher saying to me that after they came in, we were doing maths, and then we came back and did the maths. We were halfway through a lesson, and well, it was very interesting. For 20 minutes afterwards, they were really focused. It was quiet. We had the best maths lesson I've ever had. So I was interested by that. Why do you think that might be? And that just illustrates that it's just unknown. It's not something you've known about or been taught about. And the government guideline is an hour a day of physical activity for children, moderate to vigorous. But actually, that's the minimum. And if you think about how we grew up in the savannah, a few tens of thousands of years ago, we were jogging all the time. So which brings us on to adults. A walk, just go out for a 20-minute walk. It's amazingly powerful. It has been shown to stimulate the brain, to allow you to clear your mind. It's extraordinarily powerful. And so start with that.
Yeah, and I've noticed the power of that. Yesterday, I did a 3.5 hour training that I was delivering online, and then I had a call, and I said, actually, can we do a phone call rather than Zoom? Because I just need to walk. I felt so much better when I sort of walked a couple of laps around the lake. It's amazing how it just completely changes your mindset. And I guess there's a lot of research, isn't there, about when you're focusing on something, your brain is in focus mode where your brain waves are very linear and stuff. But then as soon as you stop that and go and make a cup of tea or do something else or take a walk, your brain goes into the diffuse mode. So you are naturally being creative and solving problems and everything like that. So it's really good for productivity. It's good for creativity. But how do we get people to, I don't know, engage with this? I'm thinking of GPs who get to the surgery 7:30 in the morning, and then they don't leave till maybe 6:37, probably at the earliest. They have to get home, feed the family, whatever, get kids to bed, and then often they're dialing in to finish off their work. So how on earth can they, because the best one in the world, they're not going to be able to go to the gym for an hour or do anything like that. What advice would you give to people in that sort of situation?
Well, for me, it's been about building it into your routine, but not taking it out of what you feel your core work is. And so, in fact, when we do these training courses in schools, one of the things that often comes up is, well, I'll just park my car a couple of miles away from the school. Yeah, there are things you can do really simply, which just give you that opportunity. For me, I'm fortunate that we live in Cambridge. Everybody cycles in Cambridge. My cycle route to Cambridge takes me over our local hill, which to most people it wouldn't be noticed, but we think of it as a hill. But it gives me enough to get up to some decent heart rate, and it clears my head on my return journey. Bit of exercise, 20 minutes, fabulous. And that's all that's needed to have a huge effect. The World Health Organization did a study, and they showed that just 2.5 hours a week of physical activity, which is not very much for us adults. What's that, 20 minutes a day? A bit more than that. It just can really stave off the illnesses associated with lack of activity. So your listeners may or may not know this, but inactivity kills more people, or as many people actually, about the same as smoking. That's a pretty interesting statistic when you think about it. Sitting on that couch, you may as well be having a cigarette. Yeah. It's that bad for you. So we're using we're using shock technique here, aren't we, to try and get people out? But in practical terms, I think it's about building into a routine and starting very small. Yeah, just a walk, and then maybe a bit more. There are lots of apps you can use. I find for myself a ball, and for children it's a ball. You need to be chasing a ball. It's amazing what you go after when you're chasing a ball. And for your GP listeners, tough one, because they do work extremely long hours. I would challenge people to say, why do you have to work those long hours? And a lot of GPs are beginning to work to balancing their work and home lives by just working shorter hours. I've been fortunate. I've had a conscious decision in my life to make sure I live near work so I can cycle to work. So I actually moved, and or not to sort jobs which require lots of travel, to and from work. It's a problem at home. We've now living at home and working at home.
Yeah.
And so that is, Zoom fatigue is happening. It's exhausting spending all day in front of a screen. You actually have to get out for a walk. I just say go for a walk.
Yeah. I think there's a couple of really interesting things in there. I think firstly it's about planning it into your day, and I think with GPs, just saying to them work less, that's tricky. But actually, I have a thing called the Thrive Week Planner, and I'll put the link in the show notes, where it's basically a plan of your whole week. And what I get people to do when I'm coaching them is to put down all the work they're doing in the week. Don't skimp, say exactly how much admin work, what time you're getting to work, when you're doing it, so you can actually see a screenshot of your week. And then work out, most people look at it and go, oh my word, I'm doing far too much. Work out what you can eliminate, because most GPs are doing far too much. They've got too many roles, and they just think that they can squash 25 hours into a 24-hour day, which just isn't possible. But then you need to say, actually, when is it am I going to do my exercise, and block it off and plan it and be very, very intentional about it. And I think a lot of us are a little bit martyrish and go, I just have to work all the way through lunch. I can't possibly even take a 20-minute break to go for a walk. Actually, you can. You need to plan it. You need to make a few changes that you can. I think you do make the time for the things that you really, really want to do. And I think exercise is so important that it's a little bit daft if you're not planning exercise. In my week, exercise is the first thing that I plan in, because I know it's really important to me.
I found something which works very well is, as a GP, you are a partner in practice. But if you start requiring this of your team, your admin team, your nurses and others, then it becomes the default. And so I've, in my companies and this current social enterprise I work with, we have insisted that people take an hour's lunch break. And I know that I've got this pressure to, oh, this is another call I need to finish. But actually, it's been fantastic. We set that out right from the start. And the result is that people do take it. There is a gym nearby. It's fantastic. They go off. And sometimes, frankly, they come back a bit late. But I don't mind because they've done an exercise. And I know they're going to be hugely productive. And once you do that for others, if you delegate away, because I know that us leaders, particularly GPs who are very bright people, you think a problem and therefore you think it's done. And then you find yourself spending the next few hours doing it, whereas actually the interesting bit was thinking it. Yeah.
Yes.
But you actually have to do it, and that takes up the hours. Is delegate. There's a lot of things that, as leaders, we can delegate, and people love it. People love being delegated to.
I think it's hard though, because we do teach delegation on the Lead Manage Thrive course, and we always say to people that if you are, a GP or a practice manager, or you've got a lawyer or an accountant, and you are doing something that someone else in your organisation who's paid less than you, perhaps, or less senior than you could do, you're wasting money for the organisation because you're paid by your time. And so delegation is so important. People feel guilty about it, but actually, as someone who has been delegated to, when I was working at the university, they delegated to me looking at and setting up a course that someone else could have done, but I was so glad to be it gave me opportunity, it gave me area for growth. It's how I got into the whole resilience and leadership thing, because someone trusted me enough to delegate something to, but because they didn't take it on themselves and think they ought to do it and they should do it. So I think delegation is a massive way of freeing up time. I guess that the counter to that is you actually have to have the people there that you can delegate to. But I think sometimes again it's actually a lack of focus on what we've got to delegate, and a lack of time to do the delegation, then a lack of people sometimes. So
one of my other mottos is I always want to make sure if I've got 10 people in my team, that they're all productive before I do anything. And the reason for that is that 10 people is 10 times the amount of work. If they're productive, then I can start looking at myself and being productive, but actually help them get productive first. Make sure they've got jobs that stimulate them and excite them and they're really busy on. And then if there's anything left, you can pick that up. Yeah.
And of course, in order for them to be productive, they need to be looking after themselves, and they need to be, doing exercise. And I guess as an employer, if you were looking at your team and there was someone that obviously wasn't looking after themselves and you knew they weren't being active at all, would you be, I guess you can't performance manage someone, can you, because they're not exercising, and that that's completely unreasonable. But I guess if you and I was talking about this with Caroline Walker the other day, the Joyful Doctor, in another podcast episode, you would never look at a professional footballer and say, don't worry, it's okay not to train, and it's okay not to eat well and keep yourself well hydrated. That's fine, you just do what you want, because you're paying them for their physical fitness. But then in work, we're paying people for their performance, aren't we?
Well, the answer to that one is, in many ways, does that person want to progress? If they're doing an adequate job at the moment, that's great. But if they want to progress, they might want to think about being more physically active. All illnesses essentially require the body to act and fight them, whether they're obesity, hypertension, whatever they are. And so when you're fit, you've got all that energy released to feel good. I think we've all can remember a moment when we felt sharp. And think back to that moment, I'd say, and think what was going on then, and try and recreate it. This sort of don't sit around, it's not that helpful in reality. What's more helpful is picture what you want to do and how you want to be. And there's, actually, since we're talking about work, there's loads of studies that looked at physical fitness and how much money you earn. And that's obviously interesting, isn't it? Got everybody's ears now. So yeah, it's roughly 20%. Varies
more.
20% more money. Yeah. A like-for-like job. You're going to earn 20% more.
Yeah.
If you're physically fit.
Yeah. I think I can imagine there are some people listening to this podcast going, yes, but I have health problems, and I may have obesity because of some stuff that's gone on, and it's really difficult. So I think what we're not saying is you need to be peak physical performance, but just there are ways, no matter what size, shape, what other health conditions you've got, of being just that little bit more active, and that will benefit you whatever. Would you agree with that?
Completely. And these again, they'll come back to talks we give in schools. At the end of it, we say to them, we want you to start something tomorrow which is tiny, which is just one step in a direction. You're not going to change overnight. You've got to change a whole belief system. You've got to change how you feel. You've got to get that feedback loop going. Just do one or two, actually we say two little things. One starts tomorrow, and that might be park the car a mile away, or even just half a mile away. And the second one starts 2 weeks' time, so it's a bit more substantial. And then we measure it, get people to have this sort of, they're responsible to each other for doing it, accountable to each other, so we pair them up. And that just little step in the right direction gives you the confidence that you can go forward. Yeah, a small step, just a small step.
Yeah, I think absolutely. So I think that's what puts people off being active. It's, oh, but I really hate going to the gym 3 times a week. Yeah, absolutely. So do I. Don't do it, but if you like walking the dog, around the park, just maybe go slightly further, or do it more often. It's doing something you enjoy. I think doing it with friends, like you said, and we talk all about this on our Shapes Toolkit courses, what are the barriers to doing it? If it's because you get home at 8 o'clock at night and you've still got loads of work, so of course you're not going to get off the couch and go and do some exercise. So do it in your, half an hour or something in your lunch break or something. It's the art of the possible, and it's the small changes, like you said, and also not to beat yourself up about the fact if it's really difficult, because that also can just paralyze people in making changes, can't it?
Yeah, and that's obsessive. It becomes obsessive, doesn't it? Dog walkers live an average of 1.5 years longer than dog owners.
Okay. No,
extra year and a half in your life.
My kids are on this mission for us to get a dog. And I'm saying, absolutely not. We've got 2 cats. The cats would chase the dog away.
It's interesting how lockdown has driven up the number of people who bought pets. Pet prices shot up. And I think there's intrinsic need and desire for all of us to have this experience of nature, being outdoors with other animals and so on. It's a good thing, and it just, that one little step.
Yeah, don't wait for the excuse. Don't wait for your dog. Just maybe say to your partner, I'm going to go walk the dog. Be like, what dog? My metaphorical dog. It's fine. It's for my mental well-being and for my physical well-being and everything like that. So yeah,
it's so interesting when you start doing this sort of thing. I've done it a little bit at various times. You start discovering a local neighborhood. And that's a very interesting thing to do. It's quite, you discover all sorts of things and chat to people, and it's social.
Yeah, there's a whole other world of dog walking, isn't there? So, and it gets people at the house. It's really good, particularly for older people, to get them moving. So, Michael, I'm afraid we're out of time, but I think we could talk for another couple of hours about exercise, the importance. So we'll have to get you back on the podcast another time. If people wanted to contact you, find out more about, this fantastic social enterprise about getting Olympic athletes into schools to get people, kids motivated and teachers motivated, and of course it earns a bit of money for the school as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, so what we do is we run an event which raises money for the school. Actually, in the last 4 years, 6 years, we've raised over £4 million for schools.
Brilliant.
And that's the idea, is that's spent on being more physically active. I would love to hear from anybody who wants to talk to me. And so the best email address, you'll probably put in the podcast, is if you go to sportsforschools.org, sportsforschools.org, and just michael@sportsforschools.org will find me. Love to hear from you, especially if you've got comments or thoughts on this discussion, and what's worked for you, what hasn't worked for you. It's equally important to know what doesn't work as what does work. Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, and we'll speak again soon. Thank you. Bye. Thanks for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, then please share it with your friends and colleagues. Please subscribe to my You Are Not a Frog email list and